Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well this evening, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Guys, I have an upload that will take us from the LBL all the way over to Iowa with some very terrifying encounters. Before we get into that, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. Does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes 1 second, and leave a comment. Because all of these things, they definitely matter, and they do help. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's terrifying second half, shall we? Today's first encounter comes to us from Kentucky, Trigg County. This occurrence happened inside land between the lakes forest. Hillman Ferry Campground. Well, I made sure we secured the most back-country spot where you can dump camp. I wanted away from the loud people, so it was empty and quiet, covered with plenty of trees. It was about 4 a.m. I woke up instantly, asked my wife what's the matter. She simply whispered she was scared. I asked about what. She said she heard noises out in the woods. Now, normally, I would ask her to go back to sleep, that there's nothing wrong, but this time, suddenly, about maybe 5 or 6 owls started hooting. And they were going non-stop, back to back. Then the coyotes began howling with them. And then every bird wakes up and begins their story. They go on continuously for about 30 seconds. Suddenly they all stop, and I know this is completely unusual. Then we hear clump, clump, clump. Branches were breaking, wood is cracking with each step. I'm like, okay, that's biped, but a human, unless it's intentionally trying to be frightening, wouldn't be tromping around. And an adult would know and expect people to have firearms. Also, the terrain would be too difficult to simply decide to go for a stroll in the woods in the middle of the night, with no guarantee to meet somebody to scare. During the day, the forest is too dense for hunting. I know there are no bears. I know it's not a deer or any other woodland creature. That's pretty common here. So it keeps getting closer and closer. I cough really loud, no change in its cadence. It sounded like how I would sound walking through the woods, heavy and sweating, full of complaints. These steps were loud. So I get out, the flashlight's in my truck. I go to the truck and rummage around for it, and I'm naked, carrying a knife in my mouth, searching through the vehicle. I find it. Then I start searching the tree line. I see nothing, but the steps stop. So I start up the vehicle and point it towards the woods. I turn on the high beams and nothing. I get out, turn off the lights, start to head back to the tent, and then suddenly, boom, 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 it runs off. Tree limbs were breaking, trees were swaying, and I could hear it exhale as it ran. Sound like a combination of a boar and a man. And so, if you're familiar with the land between the lakes, there's a huge dogman or monster phenomenon here. Tons of stories. So I don't know what we both experienced. Pretty crazy. I am a very skilled in outdoor activities and have plenty of experience in the backcountry. I'm a retired Marine and have extensive hunting and tracking experience. This was unlike anything I have ever encountered in the bush. Just to recap on the first night of camping, I noticed that something hard hit my truck. I heard the metallic clang and brushed it off as possibly a walnut falling. Then I heard some sticks falling in the woods again. I knew that branches fall out of trees all of the time, so I really didn't think more about it. The second night, we were up late after talking to relatives in Russia. We were just talking softly and settling down to go to sleep. Suddenly my wife got me up and said she heard something moving outside in the forest. We heard something come crashing downhill through the forest. It made loud crashing sounds as it ran through the brush. I jumped up and went outside to check with my flashlight. I thought it sounded bipedal. Quickly eliminated the idea of it being a bear or a deer. As I scanned the forest with my light, everything became quiet. It was then that I heard the sounds of two exhales, almost like a sigh. Just as suddenly as it happened, the thing crashed back up the hill through the woods, making the same amount of noise as it came down. Although the woods are opened up at the bottom toward the campground, it never came out of the thicker brush. It really sounded like a large animal, almost like a horse. We immediately began breaking down camp and tossing our gear into the truck. As it was beginning to get daylight, I noted the branches and sticks were broke 5 to 6 feet off the ground at the edge of the woods, where I thought it had came down about 8 feet from the tent. Furthermore, there were 2 slide marks where it suddenly came to a halt and slid sideways. The slide marks were like 2 tire skids in the mud, although you could see marks that were made by bare feet. Upon leaving, we circled through the campground and verified that there were no other campers present, only empty RVs that were parked waiting for their weekend owners. As we were leaving the area, we stopped and talked to one of the volunteer campers further away. Told him, without going into much detail, that we were spooked that night and we were cutting our trip short. The volunteer just laughed and said, "Well, they do say that strange things happen up here sometimes." Today's second encounter comes to us from Jasper County, Iowa. I was on my way home from a friend's house at around 1 in the morning, and as I was nearing my family's farm, which is half farmland, half forest and overgrowth, I saw something cross in front of me about 500 yards up the gravel road. So, being tired, I shook my head and turned up the music and thought I was going crazy. As I passed the part of the road where I had seen this object cross, I kind of laughed and brushed it off. But as I looked more closely at my rearview mirror, I noticed that my taillights were shining off an unusual figure, standing kind of close to the road, but more closely in the brush around the road. Lately, I've heard my mom and dad talk about some local farmers that have been having sheep and chicken go missing. I heard them say that some of the sheep have been found in the trees. I know there are bobcats around here, so that's what I speculated. But tonight, after seeing this, I walked in the house and my mom and dad were still up, which is odd because they're normally asleep by 11. My dad asked me if I had counted the cows and our pigs recently, within the last 24 hours. I said I have, and asked why. He told me that sometime in the night, last night, someone or something got a hold of a cow and injured it pretty bad to the point where they had to put it down. And 2 pigs were missing, with one being found in the forest in the crotch of a tree. The pigs were farm-fed on non-confined, so they're pretty bulky. Which brings me to another story. A year ago, I was hunting bow season. I woke up at 2:30 and got my stuff ready to go hunt before class on my family's farm. I usually walk a little over a mile to get to my honey hole. As I set out, it was still very dark, but the moon was still very visible, and I could see very far and clear. As I walked down the gravel road, I heard like a light whistle coming from my right, which was the beginning of the forest. But I kept walking, thinking it was me with my bow bumping against me. To my left was the crops, so I slowly just started walking closer to the ditch opposite from the forest. About 3:15, I was nearing the other edge of the forest, which is on the north side of our property. I opened the gate and started walking toward my tree stand and had my flashlight on red LED. I was almost to my stand when I heard another whistle sound. I stopped and slowly turned in all directions and saw nothing, so I continued to walk. When I finally found my stand and began to walk up the ladder, 10 minutes passed and I started smelling this foul odor, but just thought someone had hit a skunk on the highway about 3,000 yards away, and the smell was just heading my way now. Have you note that my stand faces north into the corn, in which I can see about a mile of open land, and my back facing the woods, about 50 yards from the clearing inside the forest. As I continued to smell this odor, I started also hearing walking pretty far away from my right. Of course, I couldn't see anything, but just in case it was a trophy buck I had longed for, I strung up an arrow, just so I wouldn't have to later. Another 10 and 15 minutes passed, and I started to smell the odor again. So I plugged my nose with my fingers and started to listen closely, my surroundings. As I sat there, I heard another whistle from my right. Then, from my left, I heard a whistle that seemed to copy the first. I looked to my left. At about 60 yards away, I noticed a small figure crouched down. At first, I thought it was a stump that I had overlooked before, but as I looked closer, the moon kind of reflected a weird shine off the object. Then, as I was talking to myself into thinking it was just some weird growth, it stood up. My heart dropped into my stomach. I slowly looked to my right and saw a somewhat similar object that looked like it was already standing, about 4 feet tall, and the one on my left about 6 to 7 feet. I sat there, scared to death, when I don't know if stupidly or instinct kicked in, but I started yelling and stomping my feet on the metal stand, making some loud noises. I looked to my right just to see the object running east away from me at a very fast sprint. I looked to my left to see the other crouch back down, then pick up something and threw it at me. I'm not sure what it was. I only heard it land 30 yards from me. Then the object to my left let out a loud whistle, then a grunt. I was terrified. I started climbing down the ladder, grabbed my skinning knife, and ran to the cornfield as fast as I could. I ended up calling a friend and walking him up to get me, in a field very far from the forest. I told him about the situation, and he informed me about a year or two before that his dad had a similar run-in with a similar odd situation, and that his dad has not been hunting alone since. I've never been one to think anything about cryptids or creatures or whatever, but maybe I brushed it off last year because I was too scared, and that it was very early morning, and I could have been seeing things. But that last night made me think about a year before, and it kind of makes me scared to live where I live now. Humboldt County, Iowa. Anna Dodrill froze with fear when she looked up from a load of dishes into burning red eyes of a big-nosed, black-faced, hairy-headed creature staring at her through her window only feet away. Terror tied her tongue. Her brother, who earlier that evening thought he had seen a large and hairy arm reach out from behind the cattle shed, sat at the table with a rifle ready. But he knew nothing of the kitchen scene beyond his view. Seconds passed, slowly agonizing. The creature's eyes bored into Anna. Frightened as she had never been before, she blinked, but could not look away. After 3 minutes, Anna screamed. The creature, whatever it was, fled into the darkness outside of her farm home 3 miles northwest of there. It was the first time in my life I could not move, she states. When she saw that night may have been a beast rumored since July to be responsible for eerie night screams, broken fences, stampeded cattle, chewed up cats, mangled rabbits. The death of a dog whose neck had been broken while it was chained near the home of its master. It, named or nameless, male or female, or something biologically unknown, has been seen since. So have the terror and uncertainty. People here don't know what, if anything, is loose in the countryside. They don't know if they should lock their doors or laugh, buy weapons, or rein in their imaginations. They don't know many things about what has happened. All they know is something is different here, and they know many of them children will not walk along at night until they know more. Early September 12th, only 24 hours after the incident at the home of Anna and Jennings, the creature was sighted again. 18-year-old Robert Newell was dressing for work in a bedroom of his family's home, about 2 miles southwest of Olson. From out of the backyard came a deep whining sound. No horse or pig could have made Newell, a rock quarry worker said later. He looked out the bedroom window toward the barn, located about 35 feet south of the house and illuminated by yard lights. Newell said he saw a tall, hairy hunchback figure go into the barn. It jumped sideways into a manure spreader, got out and stood for a moment, then got into the grain spreader. Newell said the creature appeared to be looking for food. It then stood up in front of the barn for a short time, walked around a grain silo, and headed south into the recently harvested cornfield. This whole episode lasted for about 3.5 minutes. Newell states the creature was between 6 to 7 feet tall, black hair, and walked fast on its hind legs. The experiences that Anna and Newell had lasted the rash of such sightings that have occurred in and around Olson during the past few months. Since mid-July, the Humboldt and Kossuth County Sheriff's Office have received numerous complaints from farmers and residents from Olson, West Bend, and Humboldt area who have seen a hairy, large creature or have been awakened by strange screams and eerie, high-pitched whistling. Many in the area believe the creature or creatures to be, well, they don't really know. There are those who adamantly disagree with a creature theory and explain the sightings as either an elaborate hoax or a figment of fertile imaginations. Whatever the case, the sightings have brought unusual pressures to the close-knit Humboldt County town of 135 people. Alberta Bennett, wife of Olson Marshal Tom Bennett, said the situation has created a division in the town between believers and non-believers. It's left a strange feeling in our town. There has been the unusual humor that accompanies such sightings. Someone recently tracked another sign beneath the Olson sign on Highway 222, which skirts to town. The new sign reads, Bigfoot Country. A letter received last week at the post office was addressed to Bigfoot Country. Then there was a fellow who walked into the post office wearing a monkey mask. But the humor is checked by the stories related to those who gathered at Twig's grocery store. There, in addition to stories of mutilated animals, residents talk about being awakened by eerie screams at night, footprints 2 hands wide by 3 hands long, of unusual feces found in Marilyn Shamer's lean-to, and of children so terrified by what they saw they can't sleep, and who for days wouldn't walk the town street, even in the daytime. One man who has heard all of these stories is Humboldt County Sheriff Marvin Anderson. I'll tell you, if you're a non-believer after you talk to a few folks, you have to believe there's something here. I think those people have seen something, but I don't know if it's a Bigfoot or what it is. Anderson was first called to Olson in July by 3 boys, the ages of 10 to 12, came home terrified from something they had seen near the sales barn on the edge of town. The boys had spied a cat that was bleeding and chased up a tree near the barn. We heard this scratching noise come from the building like something rubbing against it. We tossed a rock into the building. When the rock cracked against the floor, a face appeared in the window and quickly disappeared. The boys told the sheriff it was big, square, black head, flat nose, broad shoulders. The boys bolted for home, and the creature took off into the cornfield. When Sheriff Anderson arrived at Olson, he learned that this was not the first incident. Days earlier, one of Jan Henkin's daughters left home about 11 p.m. to go to her grandmother's house a block away. When the girl walked out of her grandmother's back door, she heard a noise and found herself face to face with a beast. She screamed and retreated back into the house, and she told her 2 uncles about the incident. About a half hour later, another of Henkin's daughter rode her bicycle uptown with 2 of her other friends. They beat it back home when they spotted a figure 5 feet tall standing in front of the vacant lumber building. Henkins said she and a friend, Pat Young, went up to the main street to see what had frightened the girls and saw a hairy head looking out of behind one of the buildings. They quickly returned home and sent Henkins' brother and a friend uptown with a dog. As the 2 men neared the building, they glimpsed what appeared to be a large animal. Yelping, the dog charged out from behind the building and headed near their home. Henkins said she saw the creature the following night. When she and Young left Young's home, they learned why dogs were barking and saw the creature about a block from the house. When the creature took a step toward them, they retreated towards home. After that experience, Henkin set her daughters to stay with her sister in Livermore for a couple of nights. My oldest daughter would wake up and just shake. For several nights after the reports of those sightings were publicized, Olson was deluged with hunters and curiosity seekers from as far away as Davenport. At night, the traffic on normally quiet streets was so heavy, one woman complained to the sheriff's office that she couldn't cross the street in front of her home. Sheriff Anderson, who sent 2 deputies to patrol the town for a few nights, said at least 1 pickup load of gun-toting hunters were sent home. The situation and ridicule many have received from skeptics have left Olson residents reluctant and embarrassed to discuss the sightings. People are afraid to say anything anymore, said Henkins, whose children and others have been ridiculed by classmates, but those who claim to have seen the beast remain adamant. I'm not a nut. I know what I saw. They ridicule about it until they are unlucky enough to see it themselves. Newell states. This past week, reports of unusual animal sounds were filled with the sheriff by 2 farmers east of Olson and by a family that lives northeast of Humboldt. In each case, farm dogs became restless and would not leave their yards to investigate. The postmaster, who has neither seen nor heard the animal but sees and hears most of the residents on a daily basis, summed up local opinion this way. At first they thought it was a hoax, I think, but no, there has been so many classes of people's farmers, town people, who see it. They are taking it more seriously. All right, guys, I hope you all enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I really would like to thank you all for all of your support, kindness. With that, may the Great Spirit watch over us all and may He guide us down the path we call life.